I will begin my time. Now, we strongly affirm the result. The United States federal government should impose a significant pay floor for nurses in the United States. Now, just to start off with framing this today's debate with some definitions. We define pay floor as also known as like a minimum wage. It is a minimum rate of pay below which earnings cannot fall. In the USFG, there are no specific pay floors for the nursing or healthcare field within the status quo, although there are currently bills in the process of being passed. So the factual minimum wage pay for nurses in the status quo would also be the federal minimum wage for everyone else in the status quo, which is only $7.25. Significant is of considerable importance, size, or worth. And lastly, we define nurses as a person trained to take care of the sick, injured, etc., especially in a hospital, but also including things like such direct healthcare. Now onto some observations, so otherwise known as like a registered nurse, but onto some observations. First, we observe that we must solidify specific minimum pay for essential industries to address their specific needs, to prevent strikes, and work towards giving these typically marginalized communities a higher quality of life and with decreased exploitation. Next, we observe that without minimum wage adequate to nurse pay, typical pay can cause major exploitation, can include major exploitation of registered nurses and their work. And this all brings us to the weighing mechanism of stability and quality of life specifically for nurses, because we are so we're talking about like stability as well as the quality of life for nurse existence. Now onto a plan. One second. But now onto our plan. See, this house will establish a federal pay floor of $25 an hour for nurses, for registered nurses, with an evaluation every 5 years to increase it or decrease it. Before I move on, I will take a POI.
Okay, cool. Could you tell me what the hospitals have to gain by exploiting their employees and making them turn away?
You see, the thing is, although as I will explain in my case, it is much more beneficial for hospitals to not exploit nurses and to increase wages. However, that does not mean that in the status quo this is what happens. See, in the status quo, what we're seeing is hospitals, and many other corporations and companies do stand to gain underpaying workers and exploitation due to things such as increased profits and reduced prices. See, this is a status quo that's happening across the industry and should be fixed with it. But now moving on to my first substantive argument, which is this idea of nurse quality of life. See, what we're saying in the status quo, Judge, is that nurses across the United States, across the nation, are experiencing a very low quality of life and are being overworked. See, 87% of registered nurses across the nation feel burnt out. 84% are frustrated with administrators. 84% feel they are underpaid. 83% feel the mental health has suffered. 77% feel unsupported at work. 61% feel unappreciated. 60% have felt uncomfortable having to work outside of their comfort zone in the past year. 58% of nurses have felt frustrated with their patients. And 58% of nurses have felt unsafe at work in the past year. What we are seeing here is that nurses are suffering across the nation. Nurses are suffering. They have extremely low quality of life, extremely low workplace satisfaction, extremely low happiness, as well as massive rates of burnout and feeling of being underpaid. Before I move on, I will take a POI.
Sorry, can you repeat, like, what is the minimum wage that you're proposed? And also, sorry, just repeat the plan text, please.
Yes, I will also put it into the chat. But the plan text, my partner will. The plan text is this house to establish a federal pay floor of $25 for nurses with an reevaluation every 5 years. The agent of action is the federal government. The timeline is ASAP. See, once again, this is a minimum pay floor which cannot be going under. This is not the average pay that we're going to be doing, rather just the minimum. But anyways, moving on. So moving on to our second substantive argument, in addition to having extremely low quality of life, we are seeing a massive nurse shortage. See, because of the current status quo of the nurses' quality of life, nurse satisfaction, etc., we are seeing nurses leaving. We are seeing thousands and thousands of nurses leaving the workplace, and we are not seeing a return of nurses. We are not seeing more nurses enter, and this is causing a major issue because of the massive shortage we are having. See, we're currently seeing that the nearly 83% of healthcare workers report understaffing at their facilities, leading to delays in rushing of care, skipping safety protocols, as well as skipping safety protocols. See, this massive nurse shortage is hurting not just the nurses, not just the hospitals, but the people themselves, the people who require healthcare, who require these who need these workers, because the truth of the matter is nurses are essential. Nurses are essential to a safe and healthy nurses are essential to a safe America and to America, that a nation where people gain the healthcare they need. No, thank you. Nurses are essential. However, in the status quo, we are not seeing enough nurses to adequately meet these the needs given. See, once again, we are seeing a rushing of care and skipping of safety protocols, which leads to increased risks and increased dangers to the patients and to the patient's health. And more than that, we are seeing that this demand is only going to rise. See, it's projected that demand for RNs, registered nurses, is going to hit more than 3.6 million by the year 2030. And on top of the existing workforce, the field would need to add nearly 50,000 new registered nurses each year since 2014 and so going. And this is not what is happening. We are seeing the opposite. We are seeing massive nurse shortages that unprecedented, never seen before. We are seeing complete turning over. But this brings us to our third and final substantive argument, which is this idea of the global pandemic. See, on top of an already existing nurse shortage that was progressively getting worse year by year, the pandemic exacerbated this. See, during the pandemic, about 100,000 nurses left the workforce due to during the pandemic and due to the pandemic. We were exacerbating the nurse shortage to ever before. And more than this, during the pandemic, what we saw record levels of inflation. As we saw record levels of inflation and costs of living. And lastly, of course, what we saw from the pandemic and what we are still seeing from the pandemic is an increase in hospital fillings because of the long-term health effects of the COVID virus. See, but now let's get into solvency on why this matters. See, by actually implementing a minimum wage, we are increasing nurse quality of life. Increasing nurse quality of life, which is going to lead to more nurses staying in the field without leaving, as well as more nurses coming into the field. We are also going to be protecting nurses. We're also going to be protecting nurses, and actually, we're going to be protecting nurses to protect them, and we're going to stop potential strikes, which would be detrimental to the industry, as well as allow for better, faster care for all of people of the U.S. For all these reasons, we strongly propose. Thank you.
All right. Cool. Can everyone hear me? Okay, cool. So my name is Cheme, and today I'll be the first speaker for the negation, and I'll have 8 minutes on the clock. I'll begin when everyone is ready. Okay, cool. Seems like everyone's ready to me. My time will start on my next word. Good morning. My name is Cheme, and today my partner and I stand in the strongest negation in the resolution that resolved. The United States federal government should impose a significant pay floor for nurses in the United States. Okay, so to provide some definitions that my opponents didn't necessarily provide. So first, I will be referring to the United States federal government as the USFG, and then imposed, we define it as to force to be accepted or put in place in a national level, which is the plain text of our opponents. And then significant, we stated, is a sufficiently great or important to be worthy of attention. So that has to be a significant amount instead of just like my opponent said, $15, which is not even the minimum wage in California. Okay, so now pay floor. We define it as a minimum rate of pay below which earnings cannot fall. Basically, you can think of it like a minimum wage, but for nurses. Okay, so for the weighing mechanism or how this round should be evaluated based on is net benefits. Yes, I'll answer it.
What is the current federal minimum wage?
What is the current federal minimum wage? We agree with your statistics. So my partner knows this, so I think he can answer it, but we agree with the statistic. It's not very high.
It's like $7-ish.
Yeah. Okay, so now just to continue, we're running basically a counter plan because our plan is more sustainable, whereas their plan is not. Our actor is going to be state government because every state is different. For example, the cost of living in California and New York is vastly different from people who's living in Idaho or Wyoming. So therefore, a federal government in this case is not very feasible and cannot really have accurate information of how it should be. So the cost of the minimum wage will be relative to the state's minimum instead of the federal minimum, and also be adjusted to the inflation index. So our first contention is about how their case is unsustainable. Hospitals and healthcare providers are already strapped for cash already. The hospital gain nothing by not keeping their workers around, because once you raise the wage, the hospital will not be like sustainable or have enough funding to pay it, which is also a shortcoming on my opponent's plan, since they never stated how the hospital will be funded, especially when a lot of hospitals are private, and therefore how will they get the funding to pay their nurses when they're literally unable to do it. And especially with the nursing shortage right now, they notice they simply cannot afford them to pay more, because paying more means that they can't run the hospital anymore. So in terms, they will go unemployed, so which is worse for the hospital, the nurses. I'll take it later. I have a lot to go through. For example, the California Hospital Association wrote that hospitals need urgent financial relief, citing inflation and a lot of other costs. Help is needed immediately. However, my opponent says this is a policy resolution, did not state the funding, so therefore we don't know how they're gonna be able to pay all those wages they stated in the first place. Also, why would they, because forced hire pay would also result in worse working conditions for the employees, because they simply would not be able to hire more people due to budgeting restrictions. For example, if you only have a certain amount of budget, and if the wage is so high, you can't afford to hire that many people because you don't have the funding. So in terms, the hospital working condition will be worse for the employees, and also less healthcare access for the patients, which means lower healthcare speed and higher prices for the patients. Just to show you some comparisons, the USSF Medical Center has an average pay wage of $81 per hour, and the Santa Clara Valley Medical Center, it has an hour of 75.91 cents per hour. That's a lot. So even if there's no like national play floor for lawyers and doctors, they still get paid a lot, because you need like a decent education to get this job in the first place. So they will always be paid more than, for example, your average minimum worker. Yes, what is it?
With that decent education you need to get one of these jobs, aren't these nurses subjected to a lot of debt coming out of these colleges for the rest of their lives?
Yes, of course. That's what we are saying. It should be adjusted based on the state level instead of a federal level, because again, if you go to college in New York, the college will be a lot more expensive, instead of like going to another college in a different state that would be a little bit cheaper. So instead, to make it more fair, we should use state as the government instead of just implementing like a blanket like on the federal level. So my second contention is about unemployment and surplus, because we all know that price floor is a form of price control, and the minimum wage is basically set above the market price. So in response, basically, the consumers will basically reduce the amount they're willing to buy. In this case, is the patients. They will be less willing to spend money in healthcare because it's only going to get more expensive. Like I said before, hospitals, they need, sorry, I'll answer it at the end of my flow. They do run for profit. So if they're paying such high wages to the workers, and of course, they're going to, in return, raise prices for their services. And therefore, that's going to increase, that's going to suddenly lead to like everyone who's seeking the healthcare system, especially the marginalized minorities. That's going to be a really just bad thing for them. So now to just kind of review onto their case, they say that the federal minimum is really low and nurses are overworked. So I have two responses to this. So although, again, there's no minimum wage for doctors or lawyers either, but they're still paid a lot higher. And we think that federal minimum wage is very different from state minimum wage, because the cost of living is so vastly different. And therefore, to enact this on the federal level is just unrealistic. Okay, and also the problems, all the harms they outline as like overworking and all the treatments, unfair treatment, our plan also solves for that. The only difference here, Judge, let me remind you, is that our actor is the state instead of a federal level, and our evaluation is based on a mechanism of consumer inflation index. Yes.
What is the current, like, what is the average national minimum? What is the average wage for nurses in the status quo?
Right now we don't have like a specific like wage implemented yet, or else we wouldn't be debating this. There's no national minimum wage for nurses right now. So all we are saying is that it should be decided by states. So now to just kind of say the flaws in my opponent's plan. So first of all, they lack the funding, which is extremely crucial in a policy resolution, because who's going to be funding those hospitals, the private hospitals, the government running hospitals? Who's going to be funding those hospitals? And also, what is the cost going to be like? There's nothing like that. So their policy is extremely vague and has no clarity, which makes it really hard for the negation to attack, since like we all know that raising the wages can affect the economy in many ways, not just affecting the nurses, but also the patients who's seeking for healthcare access. Also, they never stated what their re-evaluation method will be, because that is also extremely crucial. How are they gonna know what is gonna be the wage? Like, it cannot just be an arbitrary number, right? Whereas in our plan, we say that we'll be using the inflation index to measure. So that's a more accurate method right there. So again, this is a policy resolution, and my opponents failed to provide a lot of crucial information. And for all these reasons, I urge you to vote for the negation.
Awesome. That should bring us into the second speech coming out of the government in today's debate. I am Zaire Hampton. I'll be giving the second speech coming from the government today. Before I get into my actual case, just a quick off-time roadmap. I'm first going to be starting off with defending and extending my case before I move on to my opponents and start to deconstruct it. Now, before I get into this, is anyone not ready? Perfect. Allow time to begin now. Judge, first off, starting with top of case, my opponent tries to provide a couple of counter definitions. Now, going over the actual shortening of the actual wording of the resolution of the United States federal government to the USFG, we can completely agree on this. Going over to their actual definition of impose, again, we can agree on this. And onto their actual definition of significant, this is very closely aligned to the definition that we gave, so I think we can agree on this. Now, onto the definition of pay for. Theirs is actually a shortened version of our definition that does not actually go on to, like our definition, again, specifically outline the current pay floors to the industries at right now. So now going further in, let's actually establish a couple of facts going into the actual further into top of case today. Specifically, the specific fact that the actual minimum wage currently for nurses does not exist, so we must default to the federal minimum wage, which is $7.25. Going further beyond this, go right ahead.
Sure, awesome. Can you provide some examples of other industries that already have higher than the usual minimum wages? Like we're putting like a nurse minimum wage. Do any other industries have special minimum wages?
What we must understand, as my partner actually specifically pointed out in their observation, which once again went unrefuted throughout my opponent's last speech, once again, we must be again establishing these types of minimum wages, establishing these specific ones to these industries. Again, I'll just reiterate our entire observation for our first one. We must solidify specific minimum pay for essential industries to address their specific needs, prevent strikes, and work towards giving these typically marginalized communities quality of life. Once again, we already point out how we specifically should be operating toward a world in which we are providing more of these specific minimum wages to these specific industries. My opponents, if they try and bring up any point saying that we actually shouldn't be doing this, it's too late, and their plan already, again, tries to go under and give these specific industries, again, a minimum wage. Now, moving further into actually looking at weighing mechanism in today's debate, I don't believe we actually get a counter weighing mechanism out of my opponents, so I'm just going to continue going under the weighing mechanism of stability and quality of life of nurses. Now, moving forward into this, going on to actual plan specifics and going over to things that they are trying to attack our plan on. Now, they, number one, try and heavily attack our plan for lack of funding. However, we just need to do some quick math with the statistics that we verifiably showed you within today's debate. Number one, let's just keep a couple of numbers in our head for right now. We have the current federal minimum wage, which is $7.25 an hour. Now, we show you a card and evidence that shows that the hourly average pay for a registered nurse in the United States is $40 an hour. While ZipRecruiter is seeing an hourly pay as high as $62 and as low as $17, the majority of registered nurses currently range between $29 in the 20th percentile to $41, again, 75th percentile across the United States. So even in my opponent's worlds, where they try and bring up these specific points, try and talking about how states specifically have certain needs of their own, Once again, I'll take it in a second. Once again, we specifically showed you through statistics that the actual federal, not the federal, but the standard pay of nurses is again at the average of $40. So us actually raising the minimum wage as we do in our plan for nurses up to $25 is still well below the average median pay for this industry. Therefore, when we are going from a boost of $7.25, which is the average minimum right now, to our minimum of $25, not only are we meeting that actual barrier of a significant jump, because that is a large jump. However, we are still safely within that zone of inclusion where we are not forcing hospitals to pay more, because once again, we're not forcing them to pay more than they are already doing, or then there's already the standard for the industry. We are only solidifying the rights of these workers. That is something we must keep in mind in today's debate, Judge. Now, moving forward into this, onto my opponent's actual points against our other points against our case. They then try and attack our actual plan of the part of our plan that talks about the evaluations that are going to be happening. Once again, the government typically takes actual evaluations on the programs it puts into place and uses, again, it's a variety of means. We actually fee out the evaluation. This is a time suck, specifically trying to give in to waste time within today's debate. It would be unfair to have to go over every single instance of of specific within the plan for both sides. Now moving into actual refutations against our substantives or our solvency, and once again, we get none of this from my opponents, because what they are going to do is say that they actually apply more. But I'm moving on to my opponent's case right now. However, before I do so, allow me to take any POIs. Go right ahead.
Yeah. So you stated that $25 is actually below the average. Then what is the point of imposing it?
What we must understand, as we already stated within our observations, once again, when unrefuted, once again, our second observation actually states this as well as our first one, but let me reiterate our second one as it focuses on this even more. Our second observation says, without minimum wage adequate to nurse typical pay, we can see major exploitation. Once again, without the actual solidifying of what the actual median, the minimum pay for these nurses should be, hospitals could change the actual wage that they provide these people at any time. It is not a solidified thing. It is not a minimum pay. We are giving these workers the ability and more rights, again, within the government side of today's debate, because we are, again, specifically focusing on their rights. Now moving into their actual case. One thing we must point out is important to my opponent's entire case is not only do they agree that the minimum wage currently is $7.25, proving that we actually still do actually boost ourselves up to the standard of substantial increase in minimum wage or minimum pay floor, but also we must understand in today's debate, my opponent's only offensive point that they are still standing on right now is that they believe that states have specific measures in place that are specific problems in place that they should be solving for themselves. However, throughout their entire speech, one thing we do not get out of them is precisely why their plan is unique in today's debate. They give no explanation as to why they are the only side that can actually impose the counter plan in today's debate. We understand on the side of the government, as they provided no uniqueness, actually, we perm their plan and can do both. Not only can we put the standard at, again, $25 an hour, which is already below the standard pay already, but again, still way closer than $7.25 is. Not only can we do that, we can also address these state-specific needs, again, as there's no conflicts between these plans at all. Therefore, because of the rules of parliamentary debate, we win because we, again, can perm their entire case. Not only this, going further down the flow, my opponent's points about how hospitals are going to have to pay more in our world simply is not true, as we specifically show you that the median pay in almost every single percentile, again, is almost always above, or is either at or above $25. Even if my opponent wants to argue about that one small percentile that says that some nurses are paid $17, we solve for this simply by perming their plan. Therefore, my opponents simply do not have any standing at all in today's debate and are again, have no actual opportunities with their coming speeches to bring up any other counterpoints against the things that they did not already bring up in their first speech. Thank you.
Okay, off time roadmap. This is not going to be super structured, so more going to be a refutation of the general ideas instead of a line by line. I'm going to attack their case and then go back and defend ours, probably. So my time will start in 3, 2. Sorry, my brother's sick. 3, 2, and 1. Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk about is them saying that we're simply not allowed to bring up new refutations in this speech. That is just completely and blatantly false. The second speech is you're allowed to refute whatever you want, bring up whatever new points. The third speech is, which is the following speech and the speech after that, those ones where you're not allowed to bring up any new points. But this one, I'm allowed to bring up whatever refutations I want, because in her first speech, she only has about 1 extra minute of speech time to be able to do any refuting. And saying you guys get 8 minutes of refuting time and we get 1 minute of refuting time, that's just completely unfair. And that point just be completely disregarded, because I'm going to be doing plenty of new refuting that she did not have time for. The first thing that I want to bring up is that this plan is just simply what they're talking about. It sounds good on paper. They're very, very talented speakers. I will give you guys that. You are great speakers. But your plan sounds very good on paper. But what you have to do is you have to look back through past how nice this plan sounds and look at how it's actually going to play out, how it's going to actually affect the hospitals and the people, and why this plan just simply cannot be implemented in the first place. Sure, it sounds nice, but we don't live in a perfect world. We're going to have to choose like a least dirty shirt kind of plan, because there are multiple different aspects to this besides just giving the nurses better pay, because this is a complicated issue. Now, the first thing that I want to bring to your attention is that in 2022, hospitals were not making a profit. They were losing they were going negative 3% instead of making a profit. Hospitals are losing money. And if they talk about how the hospitals are like these evil people exploiting their nurses, trying to squeeze any last penny out of the workers that they possibly can, that's just simply not true, because they're not making a profit. They have no reason to turn away their nurses. It does not benefit them. It only harms them. They have no reason to make their workers go away, especially when they have a nurse shortage. So if they could be paying them any higher, then they would. They talk about this point about a small amount of the workers are below this minimum wage, which kind of contradicts their entire case, but I'll get back to that later. But essentially what's happening is that sometimes these nurses are being paid under this minimum wage, and that's why we should be implementing the plan if I'm understanding what they're talking about. But they say that these people are such a small minority, then why were we implementing this plan in the first place? Because enforcing it and spending all the money on it, even when it's not needed, like they say, is just a complete waste of time. There's no reason to do it. However, sure.
How much
Does someone
money?
have POI? Oh, sorry, yeah.
How much money is actually going to be spent on this plan?
I don't remember. You guys give me an estimate. We don't have an estimate. I don't know. I can't say how much money you're spending on your plan when you didn't tell me how much money you were spending on your plan. Anyway, where was I? Okay, if the hospitals are simply not making a profit, how are they exploiting their workers? They cannot pay them. They're losing money. They can't pay them more. And they're already making so much more than the minimum wage that this small subset of the workers that are making below it are like that way for a reason. Hospitals, again, they have no reason to turn away their employees. Why would they do it? It's a highly specialized field with lots of training required. So why would they turn away their workers? There's just no reason. They're going to pay them as much as they possibly can so that they can keep them around. And oftentimes that is way above that average at 40. But when they're paid below this minimum wage, it's for a reason. And enforcing this and trying to make this happen is just going to make it worse for everyone involved. Sure.
What percentage of hospitals weren't profitable in 2022?
75%. Anyway, where was I? Okay, yes, I remember them talking about nurses having student debt, but that's just completely not part of the resolution. Like, why don't we just pay? Everyone has student debt. Should we just give everyone free money to pay off their student debt? That's just not related. I don't understand that point whatsoever. They go on to talk about how industries need special minimum wages to reflect the needs because they're all different and that we can't have workers being exploited. But why don't we have that already? We have blanket minimum wages throughout each of the different states and the federal levels and the federal level minimum wage. The federal level minimum wage is there so that that employees can't exploit their workers. And then that's a number that's kind of debatable about whether it's effective or not. But most of the minimum wage debate happens throughout the different states in the status quo.
POI.
Each state has what? Sorry. Yeah, what's your POI?
Do the federal minimum wage and state minimum wages coexist?
They do coexist, but I'll get to that later. I'm not taking any more POIs. I don't usually take any more than 3. Actually, I'll just get to that right now. So the federal minimum wage is kind of like the very, very low baseline minimum wage, right? And the states may have one that is higher or just meets it because of the different economic means of the different states. This is a high minimum wage. The federal minimum wage is $7.25. I remember being somewhere. We're just gonna say it's $7.25. I trust that. And this is a very, very high minimum wage at $25. And if we're going to make every single state do this, they might not be able to do this. And they can't do this. The hospitals are literally saying that they cannot pay their workers so much. Like, the reason the hospitals are going against it is because they just cannot afford to be able to sustainably do this plan. Sure, this plan sounds good. Like they say, sure, it might give the hospital workers more quality of life, more money. But where does that money come from? The money comes from their employers, and the employers are the ones giving them jobs. And if the employees are the ones giving them jobs and they can't pay them, they cannot do this, then what are they going to do? Well, if they're forced to do that, they're not going to be able to hire as many people. That's just a fact. If you don't have the budget to pay people a high amount of money, and then you are being forced to pay them that much money now, then you're not going to be able to hire as many workers, and that's just going to go back to them talking about worse healthcare and all that. Hospitals, again, don't have it in the budget to pay. It's simply just impossible to pass this plan. So there's going to be less healthcare available for everyone, and the prices are going to be raised in the front of the consumers. They said that this is just simply false, but that is true. If they don't have the money to be able to pay their workers like this, then they're going to have to charge more because they're not making a profit. Where is that? Where am I? Now I'm going to go down to their solvency and the little impact that they talk about. The first is that nurse quality of life goes up. And sure, maybe for a couple nurses it will because they're getting paid more, but their working conditions are going to be so much worse. And it's going to be worse for all the other nurses that now can't find a job because of the nurse shortage being exacerbated, because now they aren't going to have as many open spots available for the nurses in the first place. They go on to talk about strikes, but there's going to be worse working conditions anyway because there's less nurses, so they're going to be spread so much thinner trying to help everyone. They also have this point about a global pandemic and nurses leaving the workforce and inflation and all of that and costs going up. And that's not just true for the nurses. That's true for the hospitals that are employing them. And that's why the hospitals just simply cannot pay to do this minimum wage. They literally said that the average minimum wage for a nurse is $40 an hour. The federal minimum wage is $7 an hour. They're trying to make the nurses' minimum wage $25 an hour, with some nurses as low as $17 an hour. There's no point. There's just no point in implementing this plan whatsoever. And why is there no point? Because like they said, so many of the nurses are already above that and at the 40. So few are under it at the 17. Like they said, I'm just quoting them. And even if we were to implement this plan, it would simply be impossible for the hospitals because they cannot pay for it because they're not exploiting their workers. They have no reason to turn their workers away when there's a shortage and they don't have the money to be able to pay them this much. For all these reasons, if you just look past this plan, past the surface level, you see that the app just completely falls apart. For all these reasons, we negate. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Peter. And then I'll be the closing speaker for the negation, and I have 4 minutes on my clock. Is everyone ready? Okay, cool. So just a really quick off-time roadmap. I will mainly be summarizing some clashes and contradictions, and then I'll be providing some weighing and why we should win this round of debate. My time will start on my next word. Hi, today my partner and I still stand in the firmest negation in the resolution that resolved. This House would establish a federal pay floor of $25 for, that's their plan. The United States federal government should impose a significant pay floor for nurses in the United States. Okay, so now just going off, their plan isn't ideal. Like my partner said, they have no realistic components. It all sounds good on paper. It all sounds good. It seems like everyone's life quality just suddenly improved. But is that really the case? No, that's not how the economy works. Because if you're raising their wages, then the funding has to come from somewhere, and the profit still has to be generated. So how will that be possible? The money won't just appear out of nowhere and be given to the nurses, right? Because that's in exchange for a higher healthcare price for patients, which, again, they never refuted. They never refuted our contention about how it will result in higher healthcare costs for patients. Okay, and that is a trade-off. And apparently, we have a higher magnitude because of that. Because first of all, they said most of the wages, their average wage is already around $40. So their plan of $25 is only going to help, like my partner said, a few percentage. So therefore, their plan also only has have solvency, because the money that they're like using to help is, again, only a small percentage. Okay, so some contradictions in their case. They firstly said that the hospitals can just change them. So I was really confused because their actors supposed to be the federal government. Also, this is not a perm, because in parliamentary debate, you cannot have the state and the federal government do both. And that's why the federal minimum wage and the state minimum wage are different, right? And also, since state minimum wage always takes precedent over the federal minimum wage, we have more solvency. For example, in California, our minimum wage is around like $16, I believe, and whereas my partner said the federal is only around $7. So again, in different states, there's different situations. Yeah, pause time.
This argumentation that we can't perm due to the difference between state and federal governments and actors was not brought up in the second speech and is new in this speech, and therefore cannot be counted.
Oh, to respond to your POO really quick, my partner mentioned about why state is a better actor, so therefore it is related. Again, just continue time. State. That's our like whole point, because we're saying that states are so different, and every state has different economies and infrastructure, different availability of like the positions, right? So just putting like this blanket wage over every state is not, first of all, unrealistic, and second of all, like my partner said, it's only going to lead to worse working conditions for the nurses, because the hospital has to pay more, so they're going to hire less people. And then, well, if it's less people but the same working hour and the same hospital, they're going to be overworked even more, and therefore turning all of their harms. Again, I would just like to compare two worlds. A world where the affirmations plan is passed, only a few percentage of nurses, well, sure, get a raise. So first of all, that's already have solvency. And also, second of all, because of the raise, now the patients, especially like I said in my first speech, marginalized minority groups who's already struggling to access healthcare, will have an even harder time to access those because of the wage. So their plan is not really claiming to solve all the things they're solving for, because first of all, it's only half solvency. It's even lower than the average wage that nurses are getting paid right now. And second of all, we can prove that state is a better actor, because after all, they never had a sufficient refutation to why we shouldn't use state. They just said that we should do it, but then they never really refuted our counter plan, which is why state is better. So for all these reasons, we strongly urge you to vote for the negation.
Oh, sorry about that. All right, is everyone ready? All right, one second. Let me take a quick sip of my tea. That tea is very cold. Okay, if everyone is ready, then my 5-minute speech will begin. Nope, that's 7 minutes. I mean, not do a 7-minute speech. My 5-minute speech will begin now. Let's go over some main areas of crash strategy. Starting off with the two plan text. Well, on the side government giving the putting in a federal minimum wage, federal pay floor of $25 an hour across the board, across the U.S. While opponents are saying, advocating for that we must do it on the state level rather than the federal level, because states by states have different costs of living, different needs, etc., and so we can't do this on a federal level. But what we have to understand is that we can completely do these two things at the same time, and because that is how minimum wage works in the status quo. As our opponents agreed in answer to a POI, in the status quo, what happens is the federal government has a minimum wage of $7.25 an hour, and then states can raise it and change it as much as possible. Some states leave it at $7.25, other states such as California raise it to things such as $15 an hour. This is something that our opponents agree on. This is the status quo of how minimum wages work, where we use both federal and state, and they give us no reason why we can't use state. The only reason they give is you can't have both agents of actors. This is completely false. You can. It's how it works in the real world. It's how it works in debate. We can simultaneously have the federal government doing something while the state government does it as well. They give no competitiveness whatsoever, so we have access all of the links and all of the impact. But now onto the next major issue. Now to another major form of crash. See, another major form of crash is this idea of affordability. Our opponents consistently try to say that we're having an unsustainable business model that's going to lead to a collapse of hospitals and a collapse of healthcare as we know it. However, as our opponents have explained, is we're not actually trying to raise the minimum wage past the average wage in the status quo. As stated already, the average pay for registered nurses in the United States range from about $17 an hour. However, that's like not very common, but the real average wage is $29 to $41. So then, we don't. So all the arguments about unsustainability, high cost burdens, destruction of healthcare, etc., completely fall through, as is we're not actually adding an extra cost burden. But then this brings on to another point, Crash, which is what's the point then? What is the point in the government plan if we are not actually raising the minimum wage and actually not raising the wage itself? What is the point of the plan if the status quo stays the status quo? And the point of this plan is stability. This is a weighing mechanism that my partner and I gave in our very first speech and second speech, and that has gone completely unrefuted and completely unaddressed, which is we are trying to advocate for stability. And more than that, another thing that goes completely unrefuted is our observation, which says that we must solidify specific minimum pay for essential industries to address their specific needs, to prevent strikes, and work towards giving and then they also completely drop our other observation. Yes, I'll stop time.
The point about providing strikes, I believe, is new.
It's not new. I just worded I literally just I repeated the observation that I gave in my first speech, and there's also an argument gone through, and also your side has refuted it in your speech.
Yeah, sorry.
I have 2:59 on my clock. Is that good with everyone? Great, then I'll continue my time now, starting now. All right, so now moving on. And they also complete our second observation, which is that without a minimum age adequate to typical pay, we can nurses are vulnerable to major exploitation. These two observations go completely unrefuted through the route, because the truth is, at the end of the day, we are not trying to solve all the problems with the federal minimum wage. Rather, we are trying to have a federal safety net, which is how, as our opponents explain themselves, the current minimum wage in the United States, federal minimum wage, works. We are simply trying to have a base minimum, a pay floor, in order to ensure that no time in the future nurses are ever unfairly exploited and unfairly paid, which would lead to mass instability throughout the nation, mass instability throughout the hospitals, throughout healthcare, and mass instability for America's health. That is what we are doing. We're not trying to fix all the current problems. Rather, we are trying to have a safety net, a fail-safe, a protection against future exploitation. Our opponents have given us no reason why this does not work, given the fact that all the arguments are under the false assumption that we are going to increase hospital costs, which, as we have already explained, is not the case. Now, but anyways, moving on to a few more things. So moving on to a few more things. Once again, a point they keep trying to bring up is the fact that hospitals are not profitable in the status quo, and that if we do this raise minimum wage, what is going to happen is hospitals are going to shut down, health nurses are going to get fired, more burden is going to be put on the nurses. However, once again, our plan isn't actually any additional cost for any hospital, as we're not actually raising the wage past the average wage of a registered nurse throughout the U.S. And they have given us no reason why our plan specifically, with our specific wage of $25 an hour, is actually going to be harmful. All the arguments have been completely regardless of now, is because we believe in actually creating a more stable country, a more stable healthcare system, and protecting against strikes, which would be devastating to the American populace, as well as nurse exploitation, that we strongly propose. Thank you.
All right, good round. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you.
Good round.
Thank you. Everyone did a great job, and please give me 5 minutes. I will give the final score.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Um, Joel Jacobs is the Joel Jacobs is the director of TOC, so he's just was recording the round. Yeah.
Hello.
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 So I was just answering
Hi
some of
everyone. Okay. I done my job, and I just would like to thank you all. I thought this debate was great one, and you know, you all had great contentions and reasoning, and employed good strategic arguments. So everyone did a great job, and this round was a very close one. I think so. So I just want to let you guys know that even one team has to lose, but I give you guys a very close score, so I don't think that's gonna be very big, you know, problem for that. So don't feel disappointed. So all right, in the end, I cast my ballot for the opposition this time, and I also will write the details reason in the RFD, reading RFD, and yeah, that is being said. Both teams did a wonderful job, and I wish you guys best luck of the rest of your round. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a great round. My opponents.
Yeah.
Great
No,
time
y'all
to-
were really good. Yeah.
Yeah,
You guys-
everyone did a great job. Yeah, that was impressive. So you guys, at least I think I gave you guys a nice score. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Good
George.
luck.
Good
Yeah.
luck on
Yeah.
your next
Bye
round.
bye.
Have a good day.